principal pattern is repeated. Let me show you some examples. The children of Israel had to come to the Red Sea before God parted it. Gideon had to reduce his army from 32,000 to 300 before God would deliver them from the Midianites. Naaman had to wash 7 times in the Jordan River, which he despised, before God cured him of leprosy. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego had to be thrown into and delivered out of the fiery furnace before Nebuchadnezzar could declare, "There is no other God who is able to deliver like this." Peter had to obey Jesus to row out into the deep waters before he caught a boatload of fish. And the loaves and the fishes, of course, had to be given up to Jesus before he multiplied them. So it is a principle that is apparent, that is obvious, and that is very much present in everyday life. But this principle is evident, is glaringly evident in this passage when Joshua is now preparing to lead the Hebrews into the promised land. The Exodus narrative, the Exodus and the wilderness narrative and the conquest narrative are always so interesting to me. As we see here, Joshua is preparing to lead them into the promised land. They've wandered in the wilderness for decades. They've wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and now they are on the precipice of the promised land, and Joshua is about to lead them into Canaan. They are now camped on the banks of the Jordan, about to cross over. And in this narrative, the idea of crossing over is repeated over and over because it marks a transition in the lives of the people of God. This crossing over at this point required of them a new faith experience, if you will. And this before principle, which I've mentioned, applied to them in order for them to occupy this particular land that God had waiting for them. Now, if you remember back in Numbers, Moses had sent the spies into the land, the 12 spies, of which Joshua was one. And, of course, they came back, 10 of them with an evil report, 2 saying, "Oh, let us go up at once, for we are well able to take the land." The others say, "No, we can't do it. It is indeed a land flowing with milk and honey, but there's no way we can take it because there are giants in the land. And we were like grasshoppers in their sight, and so were we in our own sight." And so because of their disbelief, the Hebrew writer talks about it, that they entered not in because of their disbelief. Because of their unbelief, God then sentences them, as it were, to wander in the wilderness for 1 year for every day that they were in the promised land or in Canaan spying it out. Hence, they were in the wilderness for 40 years until that unbelieving generation died out. So when we reach the book of Joshua, the book opens with a new leader. It opens with Joshua. Of course, we've seen him before, again, as one of the spies in Canaan. And he's been handed, as it were, a seemingly impossible task. Now, Joshua has been given the task of leading this nomadic nation, these children of Israel, in the process of taking over, watch this, an inhabited land. It's not like the land was unoccupied. The land was occupied. There were people there. And they have the task of now going in, conquering, and taking it over. So this narrative of Joshua marks the end of the Exodus and the wilderness wanderings, and it introduces to us a new generation of leaders who now lead a new generation of people into the promised inheritance of a new land. Now, let's look at Joshua's life for just a moment. Joshua's life was remarkable by all accounts. It was filled with excitement, variety, success, honor. Joshua was known as a man for his deep trust in God. He was a man in whom was the Spirit of God. Now, of course, as a young man, he had lived through the bitter realities of slavery in Egypt. He, of course, had witnessed the supernatural plagues that God visited upon Egypt. He had seen the miracle of Israel's escape from Pharaoh's army when the waters of the Red Sea miraculously opens before them and they cross over on dry land. When Israel was encamped in the Sinai Peninsula, it was Joshua who led the troops to victory over the Amalekites. When Moses was called by God up into the mountain on the crest of Horeb, the holy mountain where he receives the tablets of the law, it was Joshua who alone was allowed to accompany Moses. When, again, the 12 spies searched out Canaan, Joshua was one of those. He was elected to represent his tribe of Ephraim, and only Joshua and Caleb, again, who represented Judah, were ready to follow God's will and take immediate possession of the land. The rest of the Israelites of that generation, sadly, were condemned to die in the wilderness. Watch this. Even Moses died in the wilderness. Moses died short of the goal. He was able to see the promised land, but he was not able to enter into the land. And so it was Joshua who's appointed his successor. It's Joshua who, in the first chapter of this book, God gives instructions, and God says something striking to Joshua, and very poignant and pointed. He says to Joshua, Moses, my servant, is dead. He doesn't beat around the bush. He doesn't cut any corners. He doesn't sugarcoat it. He says it bluntly. Moses is dead. You're in charge. It's your responsibility now to lead these people across this Jordan and possess this land. Now, God gives Joshua a series of promises. Now, let me stop and say this. There is never a time when God gives you a directive that he does not give you an assurance. Now God's not going to send you out and say, okay, you're on your own. Whenever God gives you a directive, he's going to give you an assurance. Now watch this. Now, don't misconstrue what I'm saying. He doesn't always tell you how. In fact, he rarely, if ever, tells you how you're going to accomplish what he tells you to do. But he does give you an assurance. I'm going to be with you. You just go and do it. I'll be with you. Don't worry about how you're going to do it. Don't worry about the resources. Lord, I don't have enough money. Don't worry about that. I didn't ask you about money. Lord, I don't have anybody with me. And sometimes God calls us to go alone, but we want to bring someone along. But we don't have to worry about whatever God tells us to do, how he tells us to do it, when or where he tells us to do it, because he gives us that assurance that he will be with us. So he says to Joshua, watch this, when you enter into Canaan, here's a promise. Every place, not some places, not in just one or two places, but in every place on which the sole of your foot treads, listen to what he says, I have given that to you. It's yours. That's what I told Moses. And remember, in the book of Numbers, we're told he's not a man that he should lie, neither the son of man that he should repent. I told Moses that the land belonged to the children of Israel. I'm telling you, every place your foot should tread, I've given it to you. Watch this. No man, Joshua, will be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Watch this. Just like I was with Moses, I'm going to be with you. I will not fail you. I will not forsake you. Be strong. Now, this is a command. This is not a suggestion that God gives. This is a command. This is not just a pep talk or just some encouraging words. This is actually a command. Be strong and be courageous, for you shall give this people possession of the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Don't tremble. Don't be dismayed. And here's that promise again. But the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. So here's a covenant promise. Here's a covenant promise that God has made for his people and with his people. I've already given you the land of Canaan. It's already yours. It's already yours. You know, oftentimes we expend sometimes a lot of energy, Pastor, and a lot of time begging God for things he's already given us. And he says to them, I've already given you the land. All you have to do is go in and possess it. Just go in and take possession of it. It's already yours. Go in and take possession of it. Because as you conquer Canaan, just like I was with Moses, I'm going to be with Joshua. So there's some changes that Israel had to experience. Watch this. So as they enter into Canaan, there's a change of mandate from congregating. Now follow me good. They got this change of mandate from congregating to now conquering. Now, what do you mean? In the wilderness, they congregated under the cloud, under the pillar of fire. They were congregating around the temple of meeting, the tent of meeting. They were congregating under God's presence. But now in Canaan, God says, now I don't want you just to get together. Yes, I want you to keep coming to church every Sunday. But that's not all I want you to do. I want you to get together with your fellowship group, but that's not all I need you to do. Because now I want to move you from just congregating, from just getting together, to I want to move you to the phase of conquering. There's no need of you just getting together if you're not going to conquer what I'm sending you out against. So now, rather than just congregating under God's presence, they are now enabled by God to conquer the land under his power and occupy it. So there's a change of mandate from congregating to conquering. There's also a change of leadership. Again, Moses was dead. Got a new leader. Joshua and Caleb lead the people. There's a change of generation. This generation that's now conquering Canaan had not been born in Egypt. Remember, they've wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. So this is a new generation. And this generation that's entering into Canaan, they have no affinity nor affection for Egypt. They're not looking for the leeks and the cucumbers and the onions and the melons and the fish of Egypt. They have no affinity for that. They have no appetite for that. Their focus was on their promised inheritance in Canaan. So, in other words, they had a forward focus. They weren't looking behind. They were, I believe, what is it Paul says? Forgetting those things which are behind and reaching forth to those things which are before. He says, I do what? I press the mark of God, of the high calling of God in. So their focus was on their promised inheritance. They had this forward focus. They looked forward to the fulfillment of the promises of God rather than wallowing in the familiarity of the past. Again, they were not looking for the pleasures of Egypt. They were not looking for fish and leeks and onions and garlic. They wanted the power of God. So there's a change of mandate from congregating to conquering, a change of leadership, a change of generation. There's also a change of relationship. A change of relationship. So now, if they were going to successfully conquer Canaan, it required them to be consecrated to God. And because possession requires preparation, before they could possess Canaan as its citizens, they had to reaffirm their relationship with God. We're going to see how that happens here in this text in just a moment. There's a change of relationship. There's a change of provision. In the wilderness, they had eaten meals of manna and quail. But in Canaan, on the very first day, the manna stops. They are now, their provisions are now replaced by the produce of a conquered land. Finally, there was a supernatural change. So in the wilderness, the people had experienced the presence of God in the fiery pillar and the cloudy pillar. But here in the promised land, they experienced the presence of God as the commander of the army of the Lord. So now here's Joshua. This is not just an epic account of some heroic generation. It's not just a narrative of Israel's conquest of Canaan. This is the story. This is the account of how God, to whom the whole world belongs, empowered and enabled his people to actually reconquer and reclaim what was truly theirs from the powers of this world that had claimed it for themselves. In other words, God gave them the power and the ability to take back what the enemy had taken from them. So here's Joshua's in Canaan, and this story, again, is a story of the victorious power of the citizens of the kingdom of God. The battles for Canaan, watch this, y'all. Every battle they faced in Canaan was the Lord's battle. God didn't give his people under Joshua a commission to conquer the world with a sword per se, but they had a particular specific mission. This conquered land was to become Israel's possession, not necessarily because of who they were or what they would do, but because it really belonged to God. Its people, the people of Canaan and the wealth of Canaan, they were not for Israel to seize as spoils of war to enrich themselves, but they were to be used for God's purpose and God's pleasure. You know how sometimes the prosperity preacher twists that passage, it's the Lord who gives you the power to get wealth. But they don't ever finish the passage. It's for he gives you the power to get wealth for his purpose and not for your own pleasure. It's for God's purpose, for God's plan. And if it's for anybody's pleasure, it's for God's pleasure. And on this land, Israel was to establish a nation, a commonwealth that was faithful to God, faithful to his righteous rule. And as they did that, because they were God's chosen people, in so doing, they were to become a witness, a blessing to the nations around them. And so Jesus, I think, in these words, give us some clarity to what their purpose was supposed to be and what ours is. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and in everything else Everything else that you're trying to get, that you hustling and grinding to get, all that stuff, he says, will be added. Don't you know your Father, he says, knows you have need of these things? And you seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, all these things, all these other things will be added unto you. Let me point this out to you. The first thing that we've got to understand from this text is that this is a point of transition for Joshua and the children of Israel. Now, they were now facing, or they were faced with, rather, the development or evolution, as it were, from one stage in their lives to another totally unfamiliar one. Remember, in the text that we read, he told them, you've not passed this way before. So they are in unfamiliar territory. After generations of slavery, they are freed. They've wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And now they have, and they had this great vision. But now it's time for this vision to become reality. It's time for this vision to become victory. God had given them this vision of this land flowing with milk and honey. And it didn't just start with them in Egypt. He gave it to Abraham. He gave it to Isaac, to Jacob. And now at this time in their history, this time of transition, this new generation has a responsibility now to fulfill that vision. And they've got to see it through to victory, because to whom much is given, much is required. So what is transition? I said this was a time of transition in the lives of the children of Israel. What is transition? Transition is more than a superficial change. It's more than something that happens on the surface. It's more than a nominal change. Transition is more than just saying, oh, this is different, or this is something else. Transition is a transformation in thinking. Transition and transformation. Think about the word transformation. The word transformation, as we know it, comes from a Greek word from which we get our English word metamorphosis. And a metamorphosis, I might be dating myself, but y'all remember David Banner and the Incredible Hulk and all of that, and he would go through. He changes from this mild-mannered, meek man when he gets angry, and he goes through a metamorphosis, and he becomes this green Hulk, this green monster like entity. Or metamorphosis again is changing. It's a transformation. You're changing from one thing to something completely different. It's when a metamorphosis is when a caterpillar becomes a butterfly. A metamorphosis is when a tadpole becomes a frog. There is no evidence that the butterfly was ever a caterpillar, but because they are two totally different things. There's no evidence that the frog was a tadpole, because they are two totally different things. They have been transformed. So be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So transition is a transformation. It requires a new mentality. It requires a new attitude. It's not merely changing how you do a thing. It's changing what you do. It's really a change in your experience. It's passing from one state to another. Transition does not allow you to stay in the same place. And now here's the tricky thing about transitions. They are not always easy. In fact, most of the time they are painful. One reason is this. In times of transition, we often wonder about our sense of self. Our identity is at stake. What do I mean? We know who we were. We know who we are, but we don't always know who we will become. So it's a vital and inevitable part of our lives. Everything is in a constant state of transition, a constant state of becoming. You and I, as children of God, we should be in a constant state of becoming better. I should be better today than I was yesterday. And tomorrow I should be better than I am today. Because we're in this constant state of transition. Transition is how we adapt when God or when life requires us to move from one state of being to another. Yes, ma'am.